I'd like to share with you some monumental mistakes that candidates make in job interviews, some of which I guarantee you'll hear for the first time. Let's start with the easy ones. Let's say you're getting asked the second most commonly asked interview question, why do you want to work for this company? The absolute worst possible answer to this interview question is, why not? It looks like a good place to work, right? So this would be interpreted as arrogant and, the outcome is obvious. Or maybe another example, why do you want to work for this company? Hey, you know what, I'm not sure I want to join you as of yet. I'm here to learn more about the opportunity and whether my skills and expertise fit your expectations. Okay, so truth be said, for less than 2% of candidates, this would actually be a great answer, if indeed this is the case. What happens is I've heard this type of answer for freshers interviewing with Apple. So needless to say, this won't work. The second example I'd like to share with you here of monumental mistakes in job interviews would be with respect to conflict resolution. What happens here is that some candidates have some events, professional events, that are still fresh in their memory, some uncomfortable conflicts or some conflicts with a bad ending or some conflicts which are still fresh in their memory, which they feel as if it's a compelling story to communicate in a job interview because, it contains a lot of drama and these sort of things. However, in my experience, whenever you share a story that you cannot get over with or a story that doesn't play to your advantage, ends on a negative note, it's dangerous and oftentimes can be a signal for disqualifications, right? For example, if you had a conflict with your manager 2 months ago, after which you left the role, you don't want to share that into a job interview, even though, nobody will say that, hey, I left the company 2 months prior because I had a conflict with my manager, but you would focus on the conflict with your manager that you are still having a hard time getting over with. And then, the follow-up, the challenge questions, and this is how you would end up in a bad spot. The third scenario of a monumental mistake in these job interviews would be with respect to ethics. Okay, what do I mean by this? For example, I once coached someone with a banking background in the Middle East, and I asked them to talk about a difficult customer. And basically they pitched to me how they cornered a customer into a deal with their bank, because that's how stuff works over there. Needless to say, these type of examples will not fit into, into some reputable companies. And again, if this worked in your previous role, it doesn't mean that's the norm that is accepted in your future role. So you should be really careful with these things, with ethics. Another example, number 4, I'd like to share with you here of monumental mistakes in job interviews would be to talk about to share confidential information and not being enough conscious about the problem of leaking confidential company information. And this might come across as simply you spilling the beans on specific projects you're working on with details that are private, that are under non-disclosure agreements. Okay, so probably you've already heard about this being a thing in job interviews. However, there's also other ways, more contemporary ways they would spot this problem. For example, if they would ask you how do you use AI in your work, okay, you would share how you eventually bring business value to your company using AI. And then they would dive deeper into this. Okay, what types of prompts did you use? What information did you provide the AI? Right? And this is when you must be upfront with, hey, did you provide confidential information to a public AI model or not? And if you did, then again, that's not a good sign to your candidacy for that role. So be extra careful about sharing confidential information job interviews. In my experience, preparing these things in advance is a good idea, because saying I can't share that with you every other sentence is usually not the best approach in my experience. You could provide some estimations, you could find some workarounds for this, but confidential information is something that can easily be a monumental mistake in these job interviews. Next example would be failure stories which are too damaging. Okay, so remember I briefly mentioned in the conflict resolution use case, you had a conflict with your manager out of which you got laid off, or you had to leave your role. You don't want to share this in a job interview, of course. But again, the reason why I bring this up to your attention is because there's a tendency for candidates to bring in examples that contain drama, for being afraid of sharing examples that are too flat or non-interesting for their job interviews. Maybe another mention here, something I noticed across the years, is that candidates who are late to my coaching sessions are usually not the ones with the best outcomes in this job interview. So basically what I'm pitching to you here, don't be late to your interview, because that will not end up well. Now, next I'd like to share with you a technique of how interviewers spot weakness, or how interviewers spot weak candidates in job interviews. That is the open up technique, which basically means a two-step approach. First, they would ask you a question that you will enjoy answering, something on the lines, what do you enjoy the most? What makes you smile these days? And many candidates would answer this, hey, you know what, my family, my kids, my significant others. You would go personal. You would open up, so to speak. You would feel good, because you would speak on your strength, right? It is something enjoyable that you talk about. And then they would follow up rather subtly with, all right, have you had any shortcomings as of recently, maybe? And what happens here is that because you are willing to share information with them, what happens is you're far more likely to spill the beans on any recent failures you've had. If you don't remember, recent failures are quite dangerous. And what actually happened in one of my role plays with someone, a principal PM, by the way, is when I asked them, the sequence of questions, I asked them, hey, have you had any shortcomings as of recently? Yes, then I had 3 of them. First I failed 1 year ago, then 6 months, my manager told me it was not good, and 1 month ago I got laid off. So you can imagine, the dynamic of the conversation does not evolve to your favor if you open up too much in these job interviews. Right now, if you're thinking, hey, Dan, but I have nothing to hide, I believe, that's also rather wishful thinking in this job interview, simply because the same way there's no such thing as a perfect job, there's no such thing as the perfect candidate either. So you want to stay awake, so to speak, at all times during these job interviews. Next, I'd like to share with you a filtering question. And right from the start, this is not necessarily a monumental mistake during job interviews, but I can explain to you how this becomes a monumental mistake. Let's say you get the following interview question: are you a hands-on or a hands-off person? Okay, and if you're someone who's, you're rather hands-on, you would say, hey, I'm 95% hands-on and rest 5 hands-off. Now, the challenge is that if you don't know whether they're looking for someone who's hands-on or hands-off, the interviewer might be looking for the right balance between hands-on and hands-off, or a 50-50. Whereas if you mention that you're on the extreme side of things with 95% hands-on, you shoot yourself in the foot here, because, you give them a quantifiable way to be skeptical about you. And the reason why this happens is because candidates don't know what the employer is actually looking for. Even though the job description might signal something, the job description is nothing more than a marketing manifesto. So the core idea that I wanted to communicate here is that you must investigate these things in advance and try to say it as if it's to your advantage. If you know that they're looking for a balanced candidate, and if you know they might be looking for someone a bit more hands-off, saying 50-50 might not hurt your chances, right? If you know it's a very junior role, then yes, hands-on 100%. But you must know in advance what this role is all about, because there will be some subtle screening questions which only take a few seconds during these job interviews, and you must get them right, okay? And finally, the final example I wanted to share with you here is the backbone test. The backbone test refers to basically someone would ask you about a challenging decision you had to make. Let's say you had a challenging decision to advertise using an ad using a red background. Okay, because you decided it was red out of, it was an ambiguous process that you navigated with your team. And then your interviewer would ask you, all right, but why red and not blue? You would say, hey, but most members of the team asked it to be red. Okay, what if I was a member of the team and I would have told you it was blue? And what happens here is that sometimes these candidates would try to become more agreeable to their interviewer just for the sake of social cohesion, not because you think blue was a better color, but because if the interviewer insists, you might say something like, yes, you might have a point there. And what happens here is that if you become agreeable just because they insist on something, that's how you fail the backbone test, right? So this is something also you must pay particular attention to, especially when you're talking about complex decision making and dealing with ambiguous situations, right? So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.